noise over the next few minutes, and that's okay. Rick is at the airport. You are going to be boarding your plane, flying everywhere and anywhere here in just a little bit, right?
I am just coming back from a talk in Duluth and Superior, Wisconsin, where the Fitzgerald took its fateful voyage. Then
Wow.
I'm coming back to Detroit to get a change of clothes because my luggage is gone, and
Oh,
going to the National Museum of the Great Lakes for a roundtable discussion tonight in Toledo. So that'll be exciting.
well, we're excited to have you a part of this conversation. I would like to be able to introduce you this way. And for the listeners and viewers, as we go through these points, you'll understand how honored we are to have you as part of this conversation. Ric Mixter, he's a Great Lakes shipwreck historian, author, award-winning documentary based in Michigan. You've got your docuseries that have been out. Former television news reporter who has turned decades of journalism into deep sea storytelling above Great Lakes history and below as well that we're going to hear. You are one of the few people to ever dive onto the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the most famous shipwreck on the Great Lakes. Producer of more than 30 documentaries from PBS and the Discovery Channel, exploring maritime disasters and heroism. You are the author of Tattletale Sounds, which that's one of my first questions I want to ask you is the name of that book, because when I found out Tattletale Sounds and what it means, I got shivered. I Go
It's
ahead.
connected right with Gordon. I mean, the lyric is the wind and the rail made a tattletale sound, and it has a double entendre in the fact that this book tattletales on so many of the expeditions, so much of the background, and so much of the nonsense that continues to get repeated about this legendary ship.
Yeah, and you have because you have taken issue with a lot of those lyrics in Gordon Lightfoot's The Wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald, which we're going to talk about as well, and especially from somebody's perspective that was able to see the wreckage in person. You know, it's 500 feet down. It was a 700-foot boat, right? I mean, so it's longer than what it was, in the shallow water in Lake Superior, and so we'll chat about that. And then finally, I want to talk about the storm, which your multimedia show that you travel around, and I'm hoping that somebody in the listening area, one of our colleges or one of our school groups, will invite you in to talk about that. So we've got a lot to get to. And Ric Mixter, thanks for joining us this morning.
I am thrilled to be here, even at just the airport.
Absolutely. And again, for our listeners and viewers, from time to time, you'll hear some background noise, but the details I'm sure will shine right through. This is the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And before we even get into your background and what you've been able to discover, what do you think this truly means to the public in general out there, based on just your own observations and your own history with this?
I see so many people that shy away from the word of anniversary because they feel like it's a celebration. But I have to be honest with you, the 29 times that the bell rings, this happens every year that we remember that crew. And quite frankly, we don't remember 25,000 other people that died on the Great Lakes. Usually what we'll do is do an extra ring at the end. So to me, it is certainly a memory of them. But beyond that, it marks a 200-year legacy of building ships in Michigan on the Detroit River, from the British to these giant behemoths like the Fitzgerald, that was the largest object dropped in fresh water in 1958. So to ignore this incredible legacy at Great Lakes Engineering Works, where they turned out these massive ships and even longer ones. The Homer was a foot longer than the Fitz, and really the end of that legacy too. And the celebration of the people that worked on the ship, built it, repaired it, sailed it, and ultimately the heroes that went out to look for these people in airplanes, the Navy, the Coast Guard. It's amazing. And the ships that turned around. So that's what I remember. And it is a commemoration, but there's so many great positive things too.
Well, I asked this next question because sometimes we grow up with ships in our toy box and different things that happen that kind of develop forward into wanting to do something like this. What got you motivated into wanting to, focus on the Edmund Fitzgerald himself?
Well, I was in that storm in 1975. I was about 100 miles away from where the Fitzgerald went down, and right at the epicenter where the storm reached its peak in Marquette County. And the storm wasn't that bad. I mean, as we look at it, it wasn't even the worst storm of that month. But it ultimately, for me, it was going to the ore docks and watching the boats, to hear the broadcast of it going down as a kid. And then I covered a shipwreck when I was working in television news. The Jupiter exploded in Bay City, and that, forgive me, ignited my passion for ships. So I started finding all these people that were involved in storms from 1913, 1940, which affected your listening area so strongly. We've got shipwrecks right off the coast of Big Sable and Little Sable Point still there. So I wanted to tell these stories, and the Fitzgerald fit into that. And of course, when fate came knocking, a guy individually paid for the expedition out $70,000. That was supposed to be his wife's dream home. He looked for the best guy to tell the story in a documentary, and he called me.
Yeah, that had to be just an incredible phone call, because you jump at that, right? You look at that as an opportunity to not only fulfill something inside you, but also that started sort of the line of sharing that information that we had known as a mystery at that point.
This is an obligation. And I look at 25, 26 people that dove the Fitzgerald. There's only 2 books. And the other book by Dr. Joe McGinnis from his expedition in 94, and when they brought the Bell up, it's a book that goes into no detail on anything that he found, but more picking on the different leaders, our leader versus Tom Farnquist. And it's called Fitzgerald Storm. It's worth the read. But he never even created a map that he promised he'd do after 3 days of diving and over $1 million of Canadian taxpayer dollars.
Wow. So, do you feel like what you were able to accomplish? Did you feel like you accomplished everything based on your dive? And we're gonna dive into that. Don't mind the pun here in a moment. But if I ask this question, I'm sure it's a yes. But if you ever had the opportunity to go back, it would be yes.
Oh, that's the whole point, is that when I dove it, all I knew was what was in a couple of books: Fred Stonehouse's book, Bob Hemming's book, the Coast Guard report. I knew nothing of the 30 years of research I've done since then. So I owe this to people to try to use that knowledge, from the Coast Guard original investigators to the guys that built the ship, to even the architects that built the ship, and the people that searched for the shoal that supposedly existed and it doesn't. So all of that stuff, I think, would be better with a better sonar scan and, quite frankly, an observation of the wreck. But we'd never go see the body. There's no reason to now. That's already been recorded that we did in July of 1994. So I don't see where there'd be a problem with that.
Okay. And if you're just joining us, Ric Mixter is joining us here on Mom FM and Hot Country Hits 99.9. I'd like to really kind of deep dive into this. Let's talk about the phone call. Let's talk about the first stages of, somebody putting together a dive down to the Edmund Fitzgerald. What's that timeline look like?
Well, you first have to find the funding to do it, and every other expedition's been paid for by the Michigan taxpayers or the Canadian taxpayers. This is all, coming out of the pocket of a guy named Fred Shannon out of Mount Morris. He starts calling TV stations. He wants 20 grand to go dive it. But the truth is, the ABC affiliate that was our competition had already dove it twice. In 1989, they went back in the Clelia in 94. And my station said, no, we're not going to pay for it, but we'll give you Rick to write and produce your documentary and share a cameraman, Tom Knab. And that made it perfect. So we went down as a team to recover to go down there. And we both got to dive. Tom and I both spent nearly 2 hours on the bottom apiece, and looking for those clues that we wanted to find, and getting it high definition, at the time, not high definition, but the best definition that we could in 1994.
Were you what kind of hat were you wearing at the time that you were diving down? You know what I mean? Like, was there a transition that happened between All right, the planning, the organizing, and then oh my gosh, what are we doing right now? Look at all of this.
Yeah, and I can't even take credit for the planning and organizing. I didn't think it was going to happen. Shannon took care of everything. We got up to the Sioux not thinking we'd even see a submarine. We thought we'll just do a profile of the Sioux locks and call it good. And here sat this two-person Delta submersible that had dove with Bob Ballard, who found the Titanic just months before to see the Lusitania. So we were very confident in that submarine. We got immediately out to the site. They had left a buoy on it from the Clelia expedition in 1994. So all we had to do was jump in the sub. I put my wetsuit on, jumped in the water, and filmed the submarine as it went down. And then I dried off for the third dive, and that's when I went down for an hour and 40 minutes, seeing the bow and the stern, which is pitch black. As you go below 200 feet, Lake Superior's WAB can no longer filter the light that comes through, and it goes to black. And you get on the bottom with no lights on, you're saving the battery power. Then you sail over to the shipwreck, and that's when you just start trying to find any porthole that will tell me what I can see. I'm laying on my belly as this guy sitting above me steering to try to keep it safe, and I'm just trying to get my camera into every porthole that I have to capture what I can.
Now, for clarification, though, this was on the Canadian side, and so you had the Canadian government say, "Here's what we expect of you. Here's some restrictions." How did that lay out?
This is very limited to who could go see it at that time. Underwater robots were tens of thousands of dollars. Submersibles to rent them, this was $75,000. So very limited. And they just said, don't go into any of put cameras into the pilot house. Don't go in any of the areas where there might be bodies. And we were thrilled. We knew that 29 guys had been lost and were never recovered. So we had no issue with that. But we kept getting lost because our compass would spin and spin on all the steel that's down there when a 729-foot freighter breaks into two giant pieces with the midsection just obliterated, and then 26,000 tons of taconite. You get lost. And it turns out that the dive right after mine, within minutes, they got lost, and the owner of the tugboat, who was taking his son down just to do a school report, are the first to find a guy with a life jacket on, a sailor that's right next to the open door. And it just devastated us to find it.
Yeah. If you are just joining us, we're just scratching the surface on this. And I want to, I know based on you and I, the two of us conversing yesterday, that we're going to have you back on the air in the future with different
I love it.
segments. But you're diving on the Edmund Fitzgerald back in 1994. You see this ship that's split, and tell me if I'm wrong, but the stern of it is upside down, if I'm right.
Yep.
And you have these pellets, and I guess the best way to describe them is like, grapes, or it's just small pellets that 26,000 tons of them that covered the midsection and are still visible down there. Is that right?
There's over 1 billion of those pellets. And quite frankly, all of the places where I grew up in Sands Township, just south of Marquette, are loaded with them. And it's the best slingshot ammunition you ever got. So these perfect pellets. But the sad thing is, at 30 degrees, they start to roll. And when the Fitzgerald started to get into this big wave, and unfortunately the water started coming on deck, leaking through the hatches, which we've proven that all of those hatches were not dogged down, leaking into the vents that McSorley said these are 2 8-inch, at least two, we don't know how many exact, but 2 8-inch openings with Lake Superior pouring in and the pumps trying to keep it out. And then the coamings even had damage, according to the Coast Guard, that was supposed to be repaired that winter. So it's getting lower and lower and lower in the water. And then a giant wave comes, hits the Anderson 9 miles behind them, and takes out their lifeboat on the opposite side of the storm, on the lee side of the storm. Speeds past, hits the Edmund Fitzgerald just after 7:15. And the Anderson recovers from the wave, but the Fitzgerald does not.
And I remember in just reading about this, you feel like there is, or you believe that there is some contradiction when it comes to when the Edmund Fitzgerald broke apart. You believe that it broke apart on the surface during the storm, rather than some accounts say when it hit, when the front of it hit the ground and then split. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. If you think about the three cargo holds of the Fitzgerald, the center sections were not watertight bulkheads. These were screened, and they had openings for bulldozers to drive through so they could push the cargo to the unloaders, the Hewletts or the cranes that would unload it. So the Fitzgerald was not watertight inside, and all of those pellets would shift back and forth, and those screens would likely collapse. But even if hatch number one, which had 10,000 tons of those pellets in it, rolled forward, if it did take a nosedive, like so many paintings, so many of the experts say that it did, all of that would have come forward and been crammed into hatch one and two. Hatch one and two are empty. And when I went around to the back of hatch 8 and 9 where it's ripped, there's not a pellet down there. So where did it go? The only answer is a giant pile that I found behind the upside down stern. And you don't nosedive and hit the bottom and have all your cargo fall behind the shipwreck where the stern flipped upside down 150 feet away from it. And I found the hatch covers for 2 and 3, which should have been on the bow, at the stern. It broke on the surface. There's no question. And anybody that says, well, there's still some mystery, I don't think so. I've got video to prove it.
Well, when you were diving, did you make that realization when you were down there or when you reviewed it? When did that happen?
When I saw hatches 2 and 3, we were lost. And I said, I'm on hatch 2. And they said, oh, you're on the bow. I said, no, this isn't the bow. Because as soon as we came around, we saw the upside down name on the side of the ship, which is painted on the white. So it's very, very obvious. We were on the stern. So I recorded hatch 2 and 3. And then I went back up to the bottom to look for scratches to see if it ran aground. The other theory that I knew was not right. Not a scratch on the 250 feet of the back bottom of it. And add in interviews with the Bayfield that surveyed the area that said they never found anything. The water's actually deeper. There is no 6-fathom shoal. Add in the fact that the first mate even said, I think the captain's wrong about observing the Fitzgerald in there. The only eyewitness that ever said this is possible. And then looking into the fact that that's a very convenient excuse for the shipping companies when they were facing a $10 million lawsuit to say, oh, the captain ran it aground and he passed away and that's the end of it. I find it almost criminal that people still talk about that reef. In 30 years of research, I've never, ever heard of another shipwreck going down there, and it doesn't exist. So it's a fallacy.
Well, and there was a lot of blame put almost immediately from you when you read these stories, right? That people say that the Coast Guard put blame on the ship and its crew. You have concerns about the captain and some direction there. How do you, as a historian, researching this out, try to figure out what's right and what's wrong?
The only thing you can do is find eyewitnesses. I've got 3 people, including the cook, two former third mates that sailed with McSorley, that all said that he nearly killed them. Going into storms, the cook said, I almost launched a lifeboat at one point and called the head office and said, McSorley's going to kill all of us. And they said, hey, don't launch that lifeboat because we'll charge you if you don't need it. And it's ridiculous to think that this was some guy that just skipped storms. When you look at the Weather Bureau reports, he was the #1 captain on all of the lakes, all of the 300 boats that were sailing, the #1 ship to take on those storms. And I've got the Coast Guard reports that show the repairs that they made because the Fitzgerald couldn't handle those storms. It would break its keelson. So 4 storms in 75 alone in April all the way to 75, the November gale that put them down. Every time he's tempting fate, believing that ship was making it could make its way through. Captain Cooper's interview saying that I believe my ship was infallible is exactly the way this guy thought. That I've come back, I've gone through other storms, and even Cooper said it wasn't even the worst storm I've been in. He goes, I was in the 40 storm when we lost 4 ships and 2 crews on 2 ships. The Davik flipped upside down off of Little Point Sable, and the Minch ripped in half off of Pentwater, and the cabins were wiped out. The crew was the grain was scattered all the way down to Muskegon. The Novadoc, I interviewed 2 guys that were on board that boat that went down in that storm too. So to compare them, it's not even close. The Fitzgerald had structural problems, had bad leaking, but that storm was not the storm of the century, as so many other authors have said.
Well, and for those listeners and viewers that are just joining us, we're talking with Ric Mixter. Ric, your book and A Tattletale Sound, the Edmund Fitzgerald. That Tattletale Sound is what the ship, the sounds that come from the ship, right? That's where you kind of brought that from.
Yeah, from the song, and quite honestly, tattletaling on the expeditions. I mean, we talk about the illegal taconite that was brought up, that just was announced that they're selling knives with a stolen taconite from the Fitzgerald out of our Upper Peninsula Knife Company. And this, to me, you know, when they talk about disrespect, about filming bodies, and then you realize that they took up souvenirs down there and that they left a beer can on the shipwreck in 1994. Who does that? And it's all at the bequest and the let's make the families feel better about it. But there's not a graveyard in America you can leave a beer can at. But the Newt suit brought one and put an old Milwaukee can into the pilot house. This is the type of stuff that we need to stop as a preservationist, as a very junior archaeologist. We can't allow this to happen just because we think it'll make the families feel better. And it hurts to talk like that because you want to give them what they want. But the truth is, you can't do everything people want. And just looking at the coverage we saw recently in 9/11, you know, we don't ask the families if we can show those tragedies of people jumping. You know, why do we ask the families of the Fitzgerald if we can dive the shipwreck? This is kind of silly, but I get the sentimentality. Don't get me wrong. And I'm sure I'll get flamed for it. But the truth is, as a journalist, you don't go ask permission on that part.
Well, and you brought up a very good point early on, is that because of your journalistic background, you approaching this is slightly different than a lot of those other authors and books that are out there.
Yeah, and even the other expeditions. Tom Farnquist, who helped out on 3 different expeditions. Larry Elliott, who was a television reporter at Channel 12, was involved with the Shipwreck Historical Society. All promised if they saw anything, they would erase the footage. Who does that? You know, I mean, I get it. You're trying to make the families feel better, but as a journalist, you don't go and make things better for people because the truth hurts. You know, what you do is you, through ethical gatekeeping, you decide what footage is appropriate and you put it into a light so that it's not shocking or horrible. But you can't cover wars. You can't cover the tragedies of 9/11. All of this stuff. The Desert Storm was happening at the same time, and lost Army, you know, soldiers were being shown on TV. Car accidents were found, you know, where you see that too. And it's hypocritical to say that we can't go down and show what happens in a shipwreck, but you have to be careful at what you show.
Absolutely. What were the after the conversations after you dove and you were able to say, okay, we have video footage of one of the 29 that was outside of the ship?
Well,
Did
what do you
get
do? Yeah,
pushback?
yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Did you get pushback? Did you get
What do
thoughts
you
on that?
what do you think would happen when we're in our first day on our 4th dive? We still have a second day, and this guy's already put 70 grand into a 2-day expedition. We knew the Canadian government, if we told them, would pull us off the wreck immediately. And that's not fair to Fred. He went down and did exactly what they said. We recorded like they said to record everything. We were going to give it to the police, but we had to make the announcement of what happened, but we didn't call the press. I didn't tell my newsroom at all. I said, let's hold it. Let's get our second day of diving in. And we made the appropriate, things we had to do, but we got our second day of diving and never went back to that spot. That was hallowed ground, and we realized it was by accident that we found it, but we did a better job than every expedition that's been down there, and we told the truth. And so that's what we found on the dock. Everybody knew, the press were all up, and we had more headlines on the body find than we did pretty much on the Edmund Fitzgerald sinking, which is kind of tragic.
Absolutely. And with it being Lake Superior, 500 feet down, there was the ship and what happened that day is very preserved, right? Because of the colder temps.
It is, and we have, bodies that are on shipwrecks like the Kamloops from 1927. There's skeletons on the Emperor that went down, and they've all been filmed. The Fitzgerald doesn't deserve extra protection just because it's younger. That respect exists in me for the ships that I've seen from 1913, where all the crews went down. There was 26 ships that vanished in 1 week weekend in November 9th, 7th through the 9th, same time period. But nobody talks about them. Nobody has a song about them.
Yeah.
And I think it's only fair that we give the same respect to every shipwreck. And then keep in mind, too, that the Arizona, where Pearl Harbor was bombed, 7 million people walk over that shipwreck where they're all entombed. Even the people that die later are entombed there. It's a grave site and they get respect, but it's not sealed off. I mean, for divers it is, and that is a distinct difference.
Do you feel like we have, do you feel like we've answered a lot of the questions, or is there a lot of questions to be answered?
We could scan that with high definition sonar, not even put a robot down there, and discover more of where that taconite really is to discover it. We could bring people down to mark every hatch cover, figure out where the hatch crane was jettisoned when it rolled over. That would give us a full picture as to whether or not it nosedived. I already know the answer to that. But the question is, too, who does this help? It's not going to save more sailors' lives. It's not, I'd love to pretend that some kind of modifications would be made to ships. But the truth is that the Fitzgerald almost holds as something that keeps in the back of minds of sailors. And I think it's kept them from, sinking. That's why we haven't seen anything. In addition to the fact that we only have, during the last gale, I think 6 ships were on the Great Lakes. There used to be 300. And that volume is really why we're not seeing it. But there's been so many modifications too after, not directly related to the Fitzgerald, but certainly a catalyst of that, with better suits to wear if you go into the water, EPIRBs to track lifeboats, satellite systems to do better radar, satellite phones to call for help, better helicopters to go rescue people. There's a lot of great changes, but I don't know that any of them are directly connected, although we'd like to have that, to believe that wasn't in vain.
Well, so much time has passed, and that brings up that point of, do you want any more questions to be answered as you go forward? I know you've got another interview coming up where you got a more. Do we have another 5 or 10 minutes, or are
Sure,
we?
we can do. Let's do another 5.
Okay, let's do that, and shift focus on your book, on the efforts to clean up the mystery that's out there, or some of the myths that are out there.
There's been great books about the crew. Literally you get Hemming's book where he talked to the widow and stuff, and getting that background's great. You'll notice in my first page on the book, there's nothing besides the principal players, the wheelman, the 2 captains that were on board. The one was acting as first mate. The experience that was there, the chief engineer and the cook story, I think is significant. So I don't touch on that. I go directly into the nuts and bolts. So if you're looking for a novel, if you're looking for, a story of how much they were loved, that's not what you'll find with mine. It's more about the faces of the people that jumped on airplanes to go find it, how they did it with a submarine detector, how they went down with sonar, and how they were wrong at first, and going into the Coast Guard investigation, going into the incredible stuff from the robot that found the open door, and Delta, and Clelia, Sue Coop, all the backstage stuff that you've never heard or read before. I put faces on all of that, and the bell raising as well.
Absolutely, and it was. I mean, the ship went down in the dead of night, after 7 p.m. But it seemed like it took days, right? It was a couple days before they were able to find the ship, if I remember right. But immediately that night they saw debris from the ship, so they knew it went down.
Oh yeah, the lifeboat was cut in half. Number 1, number 2 had a big split down the middle where it wasn't launched. The rottimer, right off the davit, was ripped off of it. It was just tragic. They knew nobody made it to the rafts. The 2 inflatables were found, and it was just tragic that 29 vanished without an SOS. And that's really what triggered Gordon to write the song. We've had other shipwrecks with more incredible stories of rescue and survivals of guys that were in their underwear and a jacket, and that's it, and went 2 nights in November. But the Fitzgerald was more of that mystery, and that's where it started. And I think that's why the legend doesn't go away.
Yeah. Last couple questions before we wrap up. What was the one thing there has to be one thing, and you're asked this a lot, that you were completely shocked about, and maybe you've already talked about that, but that completely blew you away when you finally put those pieces together?
Going through all the footage, I've had access to every expedition now. As a board member of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society, I get to see all their footage. I'm probably the only guy that's seen all of it, and I can look and see where the holes are. I'm blown away that there's still so much missing, that we only filmed the front and the back of the ship. We didn't get the middle section. There's a lot of questions down there. I was blown away by the finding of the body, and just so devastatingly crushed. And 25 years after, still hurting families does not make me happy at all. It crushes my soul to do this. But, people want to know. It's the number one question I get in my lectures, so to ignore it is silly. It's a chapter now. And I think that we need to stand up to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've interacted with families. You've interacted with those on the Great Lakes. It has to be tough, and I can't even imagine those conversations.
Well, it's incredible. You get to know the wheelman, John Simmons, through his grandson. It's even better to actually. I'm going to hang out with Pam Johnson tonight when she comes to National Museum. Her dad was the old cook that Gordon sang about. So many of them are close, but many of them are very opposed. They're very angry at what I do, and I'm sorry, but I don't step back just because it makes 2 or 3 people feel horrible.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes you have to, as a journalist, as you know, you try to get to the facts as much as possible. That was your career. That continues to be your career. You have your podcast that you do, Shipwreck Podcast. We want our listeners and viewers to check that out. You have your book that we want our listeners and viewers to check out as well. Purchase that one. Came out a couple years ago, but we had a comment just a few minutes on our Facebook page that praised you for all that your efforts and everything. So looking forward to that. How can people find you and connect with you before we finalize this interview today?
Shipwreckpodcast.com has all of my things. Go to your favorite maritime museum. So many of my documentaries are playing in Canal Park and Bay City, all around. The viewer at National Museum of the Great Lakes has my footage in there. So check out your local museum. I think you'll find books there as well. And just remember that there's 25,000 other sailor stories that need to be told as well. When you hear that bell chime, know that there's more stories, especially in Lake Michigan, that need to be told. Your Ludington Museum is amazing. That is a great place for people to start.
Absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough. I know there was a lot to crunch into a short period of time, but we want to definitely keep that door open and have you back on, because not just for the Edmund Fitzgerald, but you are knowledgeable about the thousands of shipwrecks along the Great Lakes.
Anytime you want to talk about maritime or aviation history, I'm your guy to chat with.
All right. Looking forward to it. Safe travels to you. And Ric, thank you for taking some time here on the 50th anniversary of the thinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So we appreciate you talking with us.
I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. It's 102.7 Mama FM and Hot Country